my guess is 10 days ago or so, it really sank into Joe Biden that this was not a winnable race. There was no point in him declaring that he was out until the Republican convention had concluded. The Republicans were spending all this ammunition going after him, and that will have been a waste if it turns out to be somebody else.
Despite mounting pressure from an increasing number of leading Democrats, state governors and donors, President Joe Biden's refusing to step aside. He issued a defiant statement last night saying that he is looking forward to getting back on the campaign trail and exposing the threat of Donald Trump. Now, this is at odds with rumors that the president is finally realizing the walls are closing in and planning his exit. Well, joining me now is Richard Goodstein, a Democratic strategist and former advisor to Hillary Clinton. Richard, thanks so much for giving us your time. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
What do you make of the conflicting narrative that we are getting from the Democrat side? We're getting more and more prominent Democrats, Nancy Pelosi among others, coming out and really questioning whether Joe Biden should stay in the race. And yet what we're hearing from Joe Biden himself is, I'm in it for the long run, folks. I can't wait to get back out and take on Donald Trump.
So I would not put a ton of stock into Biden's insistence that he's not going to stand down. He's an honorable guy. He wants what's good for the United States, what's certainly good for the Democratic Party. And I think it's fairly predictable that until he announces that he will step aside, he's going to insist otherwise. I think that, and if he does, and I anticipate that he will, I think the reason that he will put forward is not, oh, I succumb to pressure. It's, I realize that notwithstanding all my accomplishments, and his record is quite formidable, it's just that the public can't get past his age. And this unfortunate debate performance of his solidified in ways that I think he's incapable of getting beyond the feeling that this man is simply not up for 4 more years in this job. And that, say what you want about Trump, and there's plenty to say that's negative, it just is not something that the public is able to get past. And I think it will be driven home to Biden that if you look at Democratic candidates for the United States Senate in many of these so-called swing states, they're actually doing quite well. So it's not Democrats or Democratic policies, it's him and his age that people can't get past. So I think, people close to him, the Pelosi's and Obamas and so forth, are trying to make sure this happens in a respectful, civilized way, as opposed to something that will seem humiliating.
Now, Richard, it seems to me, and I'm going to tap into your position as a strategist and former advisor, there seems to be some strategy here available to the Democrats. They seem to be able to have an ace up their sleeve, if you like, because what we've seen from the Republicans, the Republican campaign, they have set themselves up to fight Joe Biden. Now, if there's one thing the Democrats can do is change that narrative between now and November, and they must be thinking, or at least one would think that they would be thinking, what is the best time to switch out their candidate if they were to do so? Are those conversations taking place, do you think? And would it have an impact on the way the Republicans have set out their stall?
I think you've actually hit the nail on the head in many respects. I think it was entirely foreseeable. My guess is 10 days ago or so, it really sank into Joe Biden that this was not a winnable race. There was no point in him declaring that he was out until the Republican convention had concluded. The Republicans were spending all this ammunition going after him, and that will have been a waste if it turns out to be somebody else. And I do think it will be Kamala Harris for reasons that we could get into. And again, think about there are so many moving pieces here. It's not only whether he decides to get out, I think he will, when there's now reports he wants to wait until Bibi Netanyahu comes and goes from Washington this coming Wednesday. He doesn't want to give Netanyahu the satisfaction, such as it is, of Biden getting out and Netanyahu still in very much in charge in Israel. But how does he couch it when he does make the speech that he says, as I anticipate, that he's getting out? I think it will not be, oh, I've been pressured. It's, I've done so much but I have such great ambitions for the country going forward. I just think the public is hung up on my age, and there's nothing I can do about that. So my call would be, I'm saying that the public should rally behind Kamala Harris and whomever she would pick. That would represent a huge contrast to Donald Trump, the prosecutor against the felon.
Do you think it will be Kamala Harris? Is that the only choice the Democrats have got?
I think it's the only choice because the alternative is chaos at a so-called open convention. I think if the Democrats go into their convention in Chicago a month from now, for one thing, they will have squandered uh, the better part of a month, during which Kamala, if indeed she's the choice, could be planning her schedule, planning messaging, doing all the things that a presidential candidate needs to do. And if they don't start doing that until August 22nd, that will have been a waste of time. So, I don't think the image of the Democratic Party squabbling with itself is a good one for the country. Right now, I don't think Democrats are like at each other's throats as they may have been, say, over the Vietnam War. People have different points of view whether Biden should stay or not, but that's not a kind of a deeply held philosophical position. That's more of a tactical judgment that people have to make. And as I said, I think at the end of the day, he gives way. I think she's it. I think if she picks a nice, moderate, centrist from the Midwest, I think she has a very good chance of energizing not just Democrats, young voters, and so forth, but others who, were what they call double haters. They didn't like Biden because of his age. They didn't like Trump because he was obnoxious.
Richard, just briefly before we go, what does that do to the Republican plan? They've set out their stall. President Trump picked his running mate, J.D. Vance. A lot of people questioning that pick and the questioning being, who does J.D. Vance bring along with him? Who does he appeal to that Donald Trump hadn't already been speaking to, if you like? But they've set out their stall. If we see that change and Kamala Harris coming on the ticket, what does that do to the Republicans' plan?
Oh, I think it puts it into a cocked hat. I really think that the Republicans, the gist of their campaign for the past several months has been Biden's old, addled, incapable of doing the job. That was really a large part of their public messaging. And I think once he's off the scene as their opponent, I think they have to scramble. We know what they're going to say about Harris being from California and all its ills, and she was in charge of the border, and look what happened there, both of which there are plenty of things to quibble with, so we can anticipate what they're going to say. But it's a different race. And, for example, there's a presidential debate that's scheduled for September 10th. Do we think that Trump's going to go ahead with that if Kamala Harris, who is a much more formidable debater than Biden at this stage of the game? I kind of doubt it. And will the vice presidential candidates debate? I agree with the premise of your question, which is I think the pick of J.D. Vance was an indulgence at a time where Trump thought that he was unbeatable, because ideologically and even geographically, he didn't really bring much to the ticket other than an affirmation that Trump is uber alles, that he is the great leader, and that people like J.D. Vance will have come around and worship him now, whereas they called him America's Hitler in 2016. I think they will look back, if indeed Trump loses, and say that was unwise, that they should have played it safer.
Richard, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Richard Goodstein, a Democratic strategist and former advisor to Hillary Clinton.